Hi, in this lesson we're going to take a look at how we create gaze-based interactions with our objects. To review, in the previous lesson we saw how we can add an animation to our objects and set the animation to start when the user clicked on the object. Remember, to click on the object, the user had to put the cursor on the object and click with their mouse. But the problem is that in most situations, a user doesn't have a mouse to click with. Many users access VR with devices such as an Oculus Rift, or with something like Google Cardboard, and neither one of them has a mouse to click with. Now, some of the higher end systems do have a mouse that you can use to click with, but most users don't have access to that. So how do we start an animation without a mouse? So introducing the gaze-based interactions. Gaze-based interactions allow the user to interact with the objects in the VR world simply by looking at them rather than clicking on them. So let's take a look at an example. If you look at this box long enough, the box actually animates. So how do we do this? Well, we start by adding our animation to the object we want to interact with. In this case, we're animating the position up and down. Next, we set the animation to start with a click. We then add our cursor to our camera. And as a reminder, the cursor is the circle that we see in the scene that tells us where we're looking. Not only does it help the user aim, but it's also needed to trigger the click. So that's our third step, adding the cursor to our camera. Notice that so far, this is exactly the same as how we handled a click-based interaction. In fact, the animation attribute for the click-based animation is the same as it is for a gaze-based animation. For the gaze-based interaction, the change is all with the cursor element. So to create that gaze-based interaction, we need to add a fuse to the cursor. Inside the cursor opening tag, we need to set a fuse attribute to true and a fuse timeout attribute to some number such as 2000. With this setup, looking at something for 2000 milliseconds or 2 seconds will trigger the action. Fuse is kind of a weird name for this, but the idea is that it's like a fuse on a firework. It ticks down and after 2 seconds, boom, the action goes off. Remember, the animation is still set to begin on a click. The fuse is really just a way to generate that click without using a mouse. So let's take a look back at this animation again. It's the same thing as we saw earlier, but now the animation starts just by looking at an object for 2 seconds. Okay, so let's head on over to the browser and take a look at some examples. Okay, so let's take a look at how we run this in our editor. So right now we just have a box that's animated. And remember, to get the gaze-based interaction, we start the same way we did with the click-based interaction. So we're going to say start events equals click, and we need to add our cursor in. So we're going to go back here and say a camera, and we're going to do a dash cursor. Okay, so now if I run this, we see that when I click on the object, it animates. But we wanted to add that gaze-based interaction. So we said that the box part of it, the animation attribute in here, does not change. We leave that all the same. The only change we're going to add now is inside of our cursor tag. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a fuse. So I'm going to say fuse equals true. And I'm going to give it a timeout. So fuse dash timeout. And that is going to equal 2000 for 2 seconds. So let's give this a try now. So now I look at my object, 1, 2, and there it goes. Okay, so again, the fuse timeout is really just creating a click action, and this part of it triggers when we see that click action. So after 2 seconds, we do this. If I change this down to 200, you'll notice that it goes really quickly. It's still not quite instantaneous, but it's 0.2 of a second it goes. We don't have to wait very long. Okay, let's look at another example. In this case, I'm going to start with a sphere, and I'm going to animate the color to turn from green to purple. So I'm going to start by just adding my animation pieces here. Okay, so the property I want to animate is color, and I'm going to go, and remember I have to go using the RGB values here. So I'm going to go from green, which is 0, and I'm going to do more of a darker green, so 100, 0. And I'm going to go to a purple, which is a mix of blue and red. So RGB, we'll go to a darker purple. Let's go 150, 0 green, 150 red. or blue rather. Okay, and our start event is going to be on a click. Okay, so remember, click now, if we want to have it gaze-based interaction, we need to add our camera. Okay, and then we're going to add our cursor. And inside that cursor tag, hold on. Inside that opening tag for the cursor, we are going to set a fuse to true. And we're going to set our fuse timeout. We'll set it this time to 1000 for 1 second. Okay, so if I run this now, I look at the ball for a second and I turn to purple. Now notice if I want to reset this, I actually have to move off the object. While I stay on the object, the animation won't start again. So if I want to re-trigger that animation to start, I move off, I move back on, my fuse starts again. The other thing to note is if I move off the object, the fuse is not cumulative, so I can't add a little bit each time. It starts over every time I get on that object. And so again, that 2 second or that 1 second here starts every time I move on it. If I wait almost a second and get off, every time it does not go, it just starts over again. So that's gaze-based interactions. Now it's your turn to play around.